stoic protector, a man forged in the crucibles of distant, sun-scorched conflicts, returned to the hollow quiet of his family estate only to be paralyzed by the sight of his young nephew, Leo, standing like a porcelain ghost in a house that was supposed to be his home. The boy's silence was a scream that no one else seemed to hear, a stark contrast to the saccharine charm of the new man his late sister had married, a man who now controlled everything. Why would a child be caged by fear in his own mother's house, a palace of polished marble and manicured lawns, and who truly deserved to have their carefully constructed world shattered and their secrets dragged, kicking and screaming, into the light? Julian Thorne felt the wrongness of the place in his bones, a low-frequency hum of discord that vibrated up from the Italian flagstones and through the soles of his expensive leather shoes. It had been a year since his sister, Lily, had passed, a sudden, tragic accident that had left him adrift in a sea of grief he hadn't yet learned to navigate. He had been overseas, closing a multi-billion-dollar acquisition that now felt like ash in his mouth, when he'd gotten the call. He had returned for the funeral, a grim, muted affair where he'd first met Marcus Vance, the man Lily had married in a whirlwind romance just 6 months before her death. At the time, consumed by his own loss, Julian had seen only a grieving widower, handsome and articulate, vowing to raise Lily's son as his own. Now, standing in the grand foyer that smelled of lemon polish and something vaguely antiseptic, Julian saw the cracks in the veneer. The house itself was the first clue. Lily had been a creature of warmth, of chaotic, joyful life. Her home had always been a symphony of vibrant color, scattered books, half-finished art projects, and the lingering scent of baking and fresh flowers. This house was a museum. The furniture was arranged with geometric precision. The air was still and cold. There were no toys strewn across the Persian rugs, no childish fingerprints on the glass doors leading to the garden. It was a sterile, soulless space, curated for a magazine spread, not for a 5-year-old boy. "Julian, so good to see you. We weren't expecting you until this evening," a smooth voice called out. Marcus appeared from the study, his smile as bright and artificial as the silk flowers in the vase on the console table. He was dressed in a tailored cashmere sweater and slacks, looking every bit the lord of the manor. He extended a hand, his grip firm and confident. "Leo, look who's here. It's your Uncle Julian." Leo, who had been standing near the base of the sweeping staircase, didn't move. He was a small, fragile-looking boy with Lily's wide, expressive eyes, but they were clouded with a watchfulness that was unervingly adult. He clutched a small, worn teddy bear, its fur matted from what must have been constant, desperate handling. The boy didn't run to him, didn't even smile. He simply watched Julian, his gaze flicking nervously toward Marcus before returning to the floor. A flinch, so subtle Julian might have missed it if he hadn't been looking for it, passed through the boy's small frame when Marcus said his name. "He's been a bit withdrawn since everything," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, sympathetic tone. "It's been a challenge. The grief manifests in strange ways with children, you know. One day he's fine, the next, complete silence. The child psychologists say it's a phase, a coping mechanism." Julian knelt, bringing himself down to Leo's level. The air around the boy was frigid with fear. "Hey, Leo. It's me. I missed you, buddy." Leo's eyes lifted, and for a fleeting second, Julian saw a flicker of the bright, happy nephew he remembered. But it was extinguished as quickly as it appeared, smothered by a wave of something that looked like pure terror. The boy took a half-step back, pressing himself against the wall as if trying to merge with the expensive wallpaper. His knuckles were white where he gripped the bear. "See what I mean?" Marcus sighed, placing a proprietary hand on Leo's shoulder. The boy stiffened, a statue of compliance. "He just needs time. We're getting through it, day by day. I've kept everything just as Lily would have wanted. Maintained the estate, ensured Leo has stability. It's what she would have expected." Julian stood up slowly, his gaze sweeping over the sterile perfection of the hall. Stability? This felt like a mausoleum. He looked from Marcus's polished smile to Leo's haunted eyes. The disparity was a chasm. He remembered Lily's last few phone calls, her voice strained, talking about Marcus's need for order, his suggestions for how she should manage her finances, how she should raise her son. At the time, Julian had dismissed it as the normal friction of a new marriage. Now, her words echoed in his memory as a desperate, unheeded warning. He had been too busy, too far away, too wrapped up in his own world of corporate warfare to listen. The guilt was a physical weight in his chest. "I'd like to see his room," Julian said, his voice quiet but unyielding. It was not a request. Marcus's smile tightened for a fraction of a second. "Of course, it's just upstairs. I had it redecorated for him. More calming colors. The therapist recommended it." They ascended the grand staircase, their footsteps echoing in the oppressive silence. Julian's hand rested on the polished oak banister, but he felt no warmth, only a deep, penetrating cold. He was an expert at reading people, at dissecting balance sheets and hostile takeover bids to find the hidden rot. And as he followed Marcus Vance down the long, carpeted hallway, every instinct he had honed in boardrooms and back-alley negotiations screamed that the man in front of him was a predator, and that his sister's pristine, perfect house was a cage. He looked back and saw Leo trailing them, a tiny shadow in their wake, his little bear held up to his chest like a shield. The boy's eyes were fixed on Marcus's back, filled with a dread so profound it made Julian's blood run cold. He was no longer just a grieving brother. He was a protector, and he had just walked onto his own personal battlefield. Leo's room was at the far end of the hall, overlooking the sprawling, meticulously landscaped gardens. As Marcus pushed the door open, Julian was struck again by the chilling lack of personality. The walls were a sterile shade of pale gray. The furniture was modern and minimalist, expensive but utterly devoid of warmth or whimsy. A single bookshelf held a neat row of age-appropriate books, their spines uncracked, looking as if they had never been touched. The bed was made with military precision, the duvet pulled taut, a lone pillow centered perfectly. There were no posters on the walls, no scattered Lego bricks, no drawings taped to the closet door. It was the room of a ghost child, a placeholder in a showroom. "Calming, isn't it?" Marcus said, gesturing around the room with a sweep of his hand. "We removed all the overstimulating clutter. The therapist said a structured environment would help with his anxiety." Julian's eyes scanned the room, his gaze snagging on a detail that felt jarringly out of place. The large walk-in closet door had been fitted with a heavy-duty bolt lock on the outside. It was new, the brass gleaming under the recessed lighting. It was the kind of lock one might use for a cellar or a gun cabinet, not a child's closet. He walked over to it, running a finger over the cold metal. "What's this for?" he asked, his voice low and even. Marcus didn't miss a beat. That. It's for his own good, I'm afraid." He developed a habit of pulling everything out, making a terrible mess, a form of acting out. We found that limiting his access to that kind of chaos helps him regulate his emotions. It's just a temporary measure, of course. A tool for discipline. He delivered the explanation with such practiced sincerity that a less discerning person would have accepted it without question. But Julian saw the flicker of calculation in his eyes, the subtle tension in his jaw. Discipline. The word hung in the sterile air, ugly and menacing. Julian turned his attention back to Leo, who was standing just inside the doorway, his small body rigid. The boy's gaze was fixed on the bolt lock, his breathing shallow. Julian knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his gut, that the closet was more than just a closet. It was a weapon. Later that evening, after a tense dinner where Marcus dominated the conversation with tales of his charitable work and his devotion to preserving Lily's legacy, Julian found an opportunity to be alone with his nephew. Marcus had taken a call in his study, his voice a low, self-important murmur drifting down the hall. Julian found Leo in the cavernous living room, sitting on the edge of a vast white sofa, looking small and lost. He was staring at a large, framed photograph on the mantelpiece. A smiling, vibrant Lily with her arm around a beaming Marcus. Perfect couple. Perfect lie. Julian sat on the floor in front of him, leaving a respectful distance. He didn't speak, just met the boy's gaze. For a long time there was only silence. Then, slowly, as if testing the water, Leo reached under the sofa cushion and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. He held it for a moment before unfolding it and offering it to Julian. It was a child's drawing, rendered in dark, frantic crayon strokes. On one side of the page was a small stick figure with wide, frightened eyes, trapped inside a box with bars on it. On the other side stood a much larger figure, a towering giant of black and red scribbles. Its mouth was a huge, jagged gash, wide open as if it were screaming. Julian's heart constricted. It was the raw, unfiltered testimony of a child who had no words for his trauma. The caged boy, the screaming giant. He didn't need a psychologist to interpret this. He looked at Leo, whose eyes were filled with a desperate, pleading hope. Julian carefully folded the drawing and slipped it into his pocket. He placed a hand over his heart. "I understand," he whispered. "I'll keep it safe." A single tear traced a path down Leo's cheek. It was a silent acknowledgement, a passing of a sacred trust. That night, sleep was impossible. The silence of the house was a living thing, heavy and suffocating. Julian prowled the downstairs rooms like a caged animal, the child's drawing burning a hole in his pocket. He stood at the glass doors, looking out at the moonlit garden. Everything was perfect, every hedge trimmed, every rosebush pruned. But the perfection felt like a threat. It was the obsessive control of a tyrant, not the loving care of a gardener. As he stood there, a faint, rhythmic sound reached his ears, almost too quiet to register. A soft thudding, followed by a whimper. It was coming from outside. His blood turned to ice. He moved swiftly, silently, unlocking the glass doors and stepping out into the cold night air. He followed the sound across the dew-damp lawn, his every sense on high alert. It led him to a small, handsome garden shed at the far end of the property, the kind used for storing tools and potting soil. The sound was clearer here. It was the sound of a small body hitting a wooden door, over and over, a desperate, hopeless rhythm. A tiny voice, barely audible, was whispering, "Please, no more. I'm sorry." The shed door was locked with a heavy padlock. Rage, cold and pure, surged through Julian. He didn't hesitate. He scanned the area, found a heavy stone garden gnome, and with two powerful, precise strikes, shattered the lock. He wrenched the door open. There, in the damp, musty darkness, huddled on a pile of burlap sacks, was Leo. He was shivering uncontrollably, dressed only in thin pajamas. His face was streaked with tears, his eyes wide with terror. When he saw Julian, he didn't cry out. He just curled into a tighter ball, his little body trembling as he braced for a blow. He thought Julian was him. He thought Julian was the monster. Julian's breath hitched. He dropped the stone gnome, its thud muffled by the grass. He knelt in the doorway, the moonlight spilling in to illuminate the small, shivering form. The child had been locked in a dark, cold shed as punishment. Punishment for what? Spilling a drink at dinner? Making too much noise? Existing? He reached out slowly, his hands open and non-threatening. "Leo," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. It was a fusion of fury and profound sorrow. "It's me. It's Uncle Julian. I'm here. You're safe." The boy looked up, his terror slowly giving way to a dawning, fragile recognition. Julian gently scooped him up, wrapping him in his own expensive jacket. Leo was shockingly light, a bundle of cold limbs and brittle bones. As Julian held him close, cradling his head against his shoulder, the boy finally let out a choked sob, a sound of such utter despair that it broke something deep inside Julian. He held his nephew tighter, turning his back on the dark shed, and walked toward the cold, silent house. In that moment, an unbreakable vow formed in the core of his being, a promise forged in ice and fire. He would not let this stand. He would not let Marcus Vance exist in the same world as this child. He would burn Marcus's entire, meticulously crafted world to the ground before he ever let him lay a hand on this boy again. Carrying the trembling child back into the oppressive grandeur of the house felt like smuggling a sacred relic into a desecrated temple. Julian moved with a predator's stealth, his fury now banked into a cold, focused resolve. He took Leo not to his sterile gray room, but to the guest suite he was occupying, a space untouched by Marcus's chilling influence. He ran a warm bath, the steam a welcome contrast to the night's damp chill. He gently washed the dirt from Leo's face and hands, his movements slow and deliberate. The boy was passive, his body pliant with exhaustion and shock, but his eyes never left Julian's face, searching, questioning. Julian wrapped him in the thickest, softest towel he could find and then dressed him in one of his own oversized t-shirts, which swallowed the boy's small frame, making him look even more fragile. He settled Leo into the large guest bed, pulling the covers up to his chin. The boy's shivering had subsided, replaced by a deep, shuddering exhaustion. Julian sat on the edge of the bed, a silent sentinel. He was about to get up to retrieve a glass of water when Leo's small hand shot out and gripped his wrist. The boy's eyes were wide, pleading. "Don't go," he whispered, the words so faint they were barely a breath. It was more than he had said all day. "I'm not going anywhere," Julian promised, his voice a low rumble. "I'm right here. I'm not leaving you," he settled back, allowing Leo to keep his grip, a tiny anchor in a stormy sea. The boy's eyes finally fluttered shut, his breathing evening out into the deep rhythm of sleep, but his hand remained firmly clamped on Julian's wrist. The house remained quiet for another hour. Julian sat in the darkness, the weight of Leo's small hand a physical reminder of his vow. Then he heard footsteps in the hall. A door creaked open and shut. Leo's room. A pause, then faster footsteps, a growing sense of panic. The door to the guest suite burst open, and the hallway light silhouetted Marcus Vance. His face was a mask of frantic, manufactured concern. "Julian, thank God. Leo's not in his bed. I was terrified, I thought." He stopped, his eyes adjusting to the dim light, landing on the small lump in the guest bed. His expression shifted instantly, the feigned panic replaced by a flicker of cold anger before being smoothed over again with practiced ease. "Oh, he's in here. Did he have a nightmare?" Julian slowly, deliberately, detached his wrist from Leo's sleeping grasp and stood up. He walked toward Marcus, stopping just inside the doorway, forcing the other man to take a step back into the hall. He kept his voice level, devoid of the rage that was boiling just beneath the surface. "I found him locked in the garden shed." The silence that followed was electric. Marcus's composure was flawless. He blinked, a perfect picture of confusion and dawning horror. The shed? What are you talking about? Why would he be in the shed?" "You tell me," Julian said, his eyes boring into Marcus. Marcus ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, his mind clearly racing, constructing the narrative. He was a master of deception. "My God, he must have wandered out there. He's been sleepwalking. It's another thing the therapist warned us about, acting out his trauma in his sleep. He must have gone outside and the door must have blown shut and locked. The latch is tricky. Oh, the poor boy. He must have been terrified. I should have checked on him sooner. I feel terrible." It was a brilliant performance. Plausible, eliciting sympathy, painting himself as a competent, caring guardian momentarily caught off guard by the unpredictable behavior of a traumatized child. He even managed to produce a convincing sheen of tears in his eyes. He tried to push past Julian to get to the bed. "I should be with him." Julian blocked his path, a solid, immovable object. "No," he said, the single word carrying the weight of an iron gate slamming shut. "He's staying with me tonight." "Julian, I appreciate your concern, but I am his legal guardian. He needs his father," Marcus insisted, his voice laced with a hint of paternalistic rebuke. He was trying to reestablish his authority. "You're his stepfather," Julian corrected him, his voice dangerously soft. "And right now he needs to be left alone. He's safe here." A flash of genuine fury broke through Marcus's facade. His eyes narrowed. Don't presume to tell me how to care for my son. You've been gone for a year. You have no idea what we've been through. You fly in here with your money and your judgment, thinking you know everything. He was gaslighting, turning the tables, painting Julian as the interfering, ignorant outsider. It was a classic abuser's tactic. Julian held his ground. He knew a direct confrontation now, without concrete proof, was a losing battle. Marcus would twist it, use it against him. He had to play a smarter game. He let out a slow breath, feigning a degree of acceptance. You're right. I've been gone. I don't know the situation. But he was scared and cold. Marcus. All I care about right now is that he's warm and safe. Let him sleep here tonight. In the morning, we can talk about getting him better help. Perhaps a new specialist. He was offering a strategic retreat, an olive branch that Marcus could accept without losing face. Marcus studied him for a long moment, the gears turning behind his charming mask. He saw that Julian was not going to back down. Forcing the issue would look bad. He relented, his expression softening back into one of pained concern. Of course. You're right. Whatever is best for Leo. I'm just shaken. The thought of him out there alone. He shook his head, the consummate actor. We'll talk in the morning. Thank you, Julian, for finding him. He backed away, pulling the door quietly shut. Julian stood in the darkness, listening until Marcus's footsteps faded down the hall. The lie hung in the air between them, thick and poisonous. Sleepwalking, a faulty latch, plausible deniability. Julian knew it was a lie, and Marcus knew that he knew. The battle lines had been drawn. It was not a game of force, not yet. It was a game of strategy, of evidence and exposure. And Julian Thorne had never lost a game he was determined to win. He walked back to the bed and sat down, his vow solidifying from a molten promise into unbreakable steel. He would gather his armies, sharpen his weapons, and he would dismantle Marcus Vance piece by piece until there was nothing left but the ugly truth. The next morning, Julian executed the first phase of his plan. Over a breakfast of untouched toast and strained civility, he proposed taking Leo away for a few days. He needs a change of scenery, Julian said, his tone casual, broaching the subject as a helpful suggestion rather than a demand. And frankly, Marcus, you look exhausted. You're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders. Let me take him to my coastal house. The sea air will do him good. It will give you a chance to rest, to recharge. Marcus was wary, his eyes searching Julian's for any hint of accusation. But Julian kept his expression open, concerned, playing the part of the supportive brother-in-law. He was leveraging Marcus's own narrative against him. If Marcus was the overwhelmed, grieving widower, he would naturally accept an offer of help. To refuse would seem suspicious, controlling. I don't know, Marcus began, the reluctance clear in his voice. He's never been away from home since. All the more reason, Julian countered smoothly. New memories, positive associations. We can even frame it as a recommendation from a specialist, if it helps. I spoke to a friend of mine, a top child psychiatrist in the city. He agreed a low-stress environmental change could be highly beneficial. It was a lie, but a well-constructed one. The mention of a psychiatrist, and the implicit suggestion that Julian had the resources to consult the very best, seemed to tip the scales. Marcus, ever conscious of appearances, could not afford to look like he was rejecting expert advice. He conceded, the decision masked as a loving sacrifice for Leo's well-being. All right, if you think it will help him. Just for a couple of days. Within an hour, Julian had a small bag packed for Leo and was buckling the silent boy into the passenger seat of his Aston Martin. As they pulled away from the grand, imposing house, Julian glanced in the rearview mirror. Marcus stood on the steps, waving, the perfect image of a loving father seeing his son off. But his smile was a predator's grimace. Julian felt Leo relax almost imperceptibly in the seat beside him as the house disappeared from view. The first prisoner had been liberated. Julian's coastal property was the antithesis of Lily's estate. It was a modern structure of glass and warm cedar, perched on a rugged cliff overlooking the tumultuous Atlantic. It was a place of wildness and freedom, where the air was thick with the scent of salt and pine. Inside, it was comfortable and lived in, with deep leather sofas, shelves overflowing with books, and a massive stone fireplace. Julian watched as Leo stepped inside, his eyes wide, taking in the light-filled space. He walked to the vast wall of windows that faced the ocean, placing a small hand on the glass, mesmerized by the crashing waves below. For the first day, Julian simply created a space of safety and quiet. He didn't pressure Leo to talk. He made pancakes for lunch, played soft classical music, and sat with him by the fire, reading. He left a large sketchpad and a box of colored pencils on the coffee table. For hours, Leo ignored them. Then, late in the afternoon, while Julian was on the phone in his study, the boy picked up a black pencil and began to draw. When Julian returned, he found a new drawing waiting for him. This one was even more explicit than the first. It showed the garden shed, a large padlock clearly visible on the door. Inside the shed, a small figure was curled in a ball. But this time, there was something else. Next to the towering, screaming figure of Marcus was another, smaller figure, a woman with long, yellow hair like lilies. She was lying on the ground, her eyes drawn as two X's. Julian's blood ran cold. Was this a child's interpretation of death? Or was it something more? Was Leo trying to tell him something about what happened to his mother? The drawing solidified his resolve. This was no longer just about rescuing Leo. It was about getting justice for Lily. He made a call to a man named Elias Vance, no relation to Marcus, a cruel irony, a former Special Forces operative who now ran one of the world's most discreet and effective private security and investigation firms. "Elias," Julian said, his voice clipped and precise. "I have a job for you. I want you to excavate the life of a man named Marcus Vance. I want to know everything. Every failed business, every unpaid debt, every relationship he's ever had. I want to know what he had for breakfast 10 years ago. I want you to be the ghost in his machine. Spare no expense." "Consider it done, Julian," came the calm reply. "Give me 48 hours. While Elias began his digital autopsy of Marcus's life, Julian pursued a more analog line of inquiry. He left Leo in the care of his trusted, longtime housekeeper, a warm, grandmotherly woman named Sophia who seemed to understand instinctively that the boy needed gentleness, not words. Julian drove back toward the city, but he didn't go to the estate. He went to the modest, tidy house next door. An elderly woman with kind, worried eyes answered the door. She was Mrs. Gable, a neighbor who had lived on the street for 50 years. Julian had seen her at Lily's funeral, a small, quiet presence in the background. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice trembling slightly. I'm so sorry for your loss." "Thank you, Mrs. Gable," Julian said gently. "May I come in for a moment? I need to ask you about my sister. And about Leo." She hesitated, her eyes darting nervously toward the imposing hedge that separated her property from Lily's. Fear was etched on her face. She was a reluctant witness, terrified of the charming man next door. "I don't want any trouble, Mr. Thorne," she whispered. "There won't be any trouble for you. I give you my word," Julian promised. "But my nephew is in danger. I think you know that." Her resolve crumbled. She ushered him inside, to a small, cluttered living room that smelled of lavender and old books. She sat on the edge of her armchair, wringing her hands. "I hear things," she began, her voice barely audible. "Through the trees. The shouting. He has such a temper when he thinks no one is listening. I've heard him yelling at that poor boy, calling him ungrateful, stupid, terrible things. I've seen Leo, left outside in the garden for hours, even when it's cold. He just stands there, not moving, like a little soldier. I called the house once to ask if the boy was all right. Mr. Vance was so polite. He thanked me for my concern and said Leo was just having some quiet time to reflect on his behavior. He made me feel like I was a meddling old fool." Her eyes filled with tears of shame and frustration. "I wanted to do something, but I was scared. He has this way about him, so powerful. What could an old woman like me do?" "You're doing something now," Julian said, his voice soft but firm. You're telling the truth. He listened as she recounted several other incidents, each one a small, cruel brick in the wall of evidence he was building. The shouting, the neglect, the sound of the boy's soft, pleading cries of please, don't, carried on the evening breeze. Mrs. Gable's testimony was the first external validation of what he already knew. It was the corroboration he desperately needed. When he left her house an hour later, he had a signed, written statement in his pocket. He had a witness. The quiet investigation was yielding its first bitter fruits, and Julian's hunt for the truth was accelerating toward a point of no return. 2 days later, Julian was back at the coastal house, watching Leo from the kitchen as the boy sat on the deck, drawing. There was a subtle but noticeable change in his nephew. The rigid, perpetual tension in his small shoulders had eased. He no longer flinched when Julian entered a room. He had even, for the first time, initiated a small, silent game of catch with a softball on the lawn. They were small steps, but they were steps away from the abyss. Julian's phone buzzed, displaying Elias's name. He answered immediately. I have what you wanted, Elias said, his voice grim. And it's worse than you thought. Marcus Vance is a black hole of a man. For the next hour, Julian listened as Elias laid out the sordid tapestry of Marcus's life. He was a predator who specialized in emotional vampirism, targeting wealthy, vulnerable women. His history was a trail of broken hearts and drained bank accounts. There were 2 previous engagements, both to wealthy widows, both of which ended abruptly after Marcus had secured significant loans or investments for business ventures that subsequently vanished into thin air. He was drowning in debt from a lifestyle he couldn't afford, a house of cards built on charm and deception. Lily, a grieving single mother who had just inherited the Thorne family fortune, had been the perfect target. He isolated her, Elias explained. We pulled phone records. In the 6 months they were married, her calls to friends and to you dropped by nearly 80%. He was controlling her communications. We also found financial records. He'd been systematically transferring funds from her personal accounts into offshore entities under his sole control. He was bleeding her dry. A cold, hard knot formed in Julian's stomach. He had failed to see it. He had failed to protect his sister. What about the accident, Elias? That's where it gets murky, Elias admitted. A single car crash on a winding road late at night. The police report says she lost control. No other vehicles involved, no witnesses. But there's a detail that's bothering me. She had a full service check on her car just 2 days before the crash. The brakes were brand new. The police report notes brake failure as the probable cause. It's a contradiction that was never questioned. The implication hung in the air, unspoken and monstrous. But that's not the smoking gun, Elias continued, his voice lowering. The smoking gun is digital. Marcus is arrogant. He thinks he's smarter than everyone else. He installed a state-of-the-art, voice-activated smart home system throughout the estate, linking everything to a central server. He liked to show it off. He thought he'd wiped the security footage from the cloud servers after your sister's death. And he was mostly right. He deleted the video files. But, Julian prompted, his heart beginning to pound. But he's not a tech expert. He missed the audio logs. The system recorded everything, not just when a camera was triggered, but any ambient audio picked up by the dozens of microphones in every room. It was all backed up to a secondary, encrypted server he didn't know about. I've spent the last 24 hours decrypting the files from the past year. Julian, it's a horror show. Elias sent the first file. Julian's hand trembled as he opened it on his laptop. He put on his headphones, not wanting Leo to hear. The file was labeled with a date from 2 months prior. The audio quality was crystal clear. First, he heard Marcus's voice, dripping with false sweetness. Leo, did you finish your vegetables? Then Leo's small, hesitant voice, a voice Julian hadn't truly heard in over a year. I don't like them. The sweetness in Marcus's voice vanished, replaced by a cold, menacing tone. I didn't ask if you liked them. I told you to eat them. You are an ungrateful little brat. Your mother, God rest her soul, spoiled you rotten. That ends now. You will sit there until you finish every last bite, even if it takes all night. There was the sound of a chair scraping, then Leo's terrified whimper. I don't want to. You don't have a choice, Marcus snarled. Then came the sound of a fork clattering on a plate, followed by the boy's muffled choking and sobbing. Swallow it. Now. Julian ripped the headphones off. A strangled cry of rage caught in his throat. He felt physically ill. He paced the room, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles were white. Elias sent more files. Julian forced himself to listen. He heard Marcus berating Leo for crying. Stop that noise. You want something to cry about? I'll give you something to cry about. He heard the distinct click of the bolt on the closet door. You can stay in there and think about what you've done. When you're ready to be a good boy, you can come out, followed by hours of Leo's soft, terrified weeping. And then the most damning recording of all. It was the audio from the night Julian had found him in the shed. You spilled juice on the new rug, Marcus's voice hissed, tight with fury. Do you know how much that rug cost? More than you are worth. You are a clumsy, worthless child. I'm sorry. It was an accident, Leo cried, his voice shrill with panic. Accidents have consequences, Marcus said coldly. You need to learn. A night in the shed will help you remember to be more careful. No, please. It's dark. Please, don't scold me anymore. Don't put me in there. The boy's pleas were desperate, begging. Then the sound of a door opening, a scuffle, and the heavy, final thud of the shed door closing, followed by the metallic rattle and click of the padlock. Julian slammed his laptop shut. He had it. The undeniable, unimpeachable truth, recorded in the monster's own voice. He had the screams, the threats, the terror. He had the weapon he needed to not just defeat Marcus Vance, but to utterly annihilate him. This was no longer just an investigation. It was the prelude to an execution. He looked out the window at Leo, who was now trying to coax a seagull closer with a piece of bread. A small, innocent figure against the vastness of the ocean. The fury in Julian's chest cooled, sharpening into a diamond-hard point of purpose. He would not fail this boy. He would not fail his sister. He would be the storm that Marcus Vance never saw coming. The first call Julian made was to Evelyn Reed, his family's attorney for over 30 years. She was a formidable woman in her late 60s, with a mind as sharp as a shard of glass and a reputation for surgically dismantling her opponents in court. He sent her a secured, encrypted file containing everything. Elias's complete dossier on Marcus, Mrs. Gable's signed statement, copies of Leo's disturbing drawings, and the damning audio recordings. He asked her to meet him at his city office in 2 hours. When he arrived, Evelyn was already there, sitting at his large mahogany conference table, her face pale and grim. The audio files were playing softly from a speaker. She looked up as he entered, her eyes blazing with a cold fury that matched his own. In 40 years of practicing law, she said, her voice tight, I have rarely encountered such calculated predatory evil. This man is a monster hiding in plain sight. What are our options? Julian asked, getting straight to the point. Legally, we have more than enough to have him arrested for child abuse and endangerment. To start, Evelyn explained, switching off the audio. The recordings are unequivocal. Mrs. Gable's testimony provides corroboration. Leo's drawings are powerful supplemental evidence of his state of mind. We can file for an emergency protective order and petition for you to be granted immediate temporary custody. That is the straightforward path. But it's not the best path, Julian surmised, knowing her tone. No, she agreed. It's not. Marcus Vance's greatest asset is his public persona. He has spent the last year crafting this image of the grieving philanthropist, the devoted stepfather. If we simply go to the police, he will lawyer up, post bail, and immediately launch a public relations war. He will paint you as a vengeful, unstable brother-in-law trying to steal his son. He will claim the recordings are taken out of context, that he was merely employing firm discipline with a difficult child. He will use the media to muddy the waters, and in the court of public opinion, he might just create enough doubt to save himself. We can't give him that stage to play on. So what do you suggest? Evelyn leaned forward, a predatory gleam in her eyes. We don't give him a stage. We take his. We let him build it, decorate it, and invite everyone he wants to impress onto it. And then, when he is at his most confident, standing in the brightest spotlight, we burn it down around him. Julian listened as she laid out her audacious plan. In 2 weeks, Marcus was hosting the inaugural Lily Thorne Memorial Children's Charity Gala, a high-profile event designed to cement his status as a pillar of the community and a devoted keeper of Lily's flame. It was the centerpiece of his public relations campaign. That is where we will expose him, Evelyn declared. In front of his donors, his society friends, the media he has so carefully cultivated. We will not leak the evidence beforehand. We will let him walk into that ballroom feeling untouchable. Then you will confront him. We will play the recordings for everyone to hear. We will project the boys' drawings onto the main screen. We will have Mrs. Gable there to give her statement. We will strip away his armor of lies in a single, public, undeniable act of humiliation. When the police arrive, and they will be waiting discreetly outside, he will be nothing more than a disgraced, exposed criminal. There will be no narrative left for him to spin. It was ruthless, theatrical, and brilliant. It was a complete and total demolition. Do it, Julian said without hesitation. While Evelyn began coordinating the legal and logistical elements, Julian knew he had to contend with Marcus's inevitable countermove. He was right. The next day, 2 uniformed police officers arrived at his coastal house. Marcus, deprived of his victim and sensing a loss of control, had filed a parental kidnapping report. He was using the system, twisting the law to his advantage. Julian met the officers on the deck, calm and cooperative. He invited them in, offered them coffee, and explained the situation with quiet, measured dignity. I am deeply concerned for my nephew's well-being, he told them. His stepfather is not the man he appears to be. I am not kidnapping Leo. I am protecting him. He didn't play the audio files. It wasn't time. Instead, he showed them the drawing of the boy in the cage. He told them of Mrs. Gable's concerns. He informed them that his attorney, Evelyn Reed, was already in contact with their superiors and with Child Protective Services, and that they would be presenting a comprehensive file of evidence at the appropriate time. He was projecting authority, stability, and profound concern, a stark contrast to the frantic, emotional performance Marcus had likely given. My nephew and I will be attending the Lily Thorne Memorial Gala in 2 weeks, Julian stated calmly. We will address all of Mr. Vance's concerns there, publicly. Until then, Leo is safe with me. The officers, faced with a calm, wealthy, and well-represented man, and having been briefed by their captain who had already received a call from Evelyn, were deferential. They made their report and left. The first shot had been fired, and Julian had easily parried it. But he knew it was just the beginning. Marcus, his desperation growing, would become more dangerous. The next 2 weeks were a tense waiting game. Marcus launched a subtle media campaign, giving a tearful interview to a local society columnist about his pain, his struggle to connect with his troubled stepson, and the added grief of his unstable brother-in-law's interference. He was laying the groundwork, seeding his narrative of the victimized father figure. Meanwhile, Julian focused entirely on Leo. He created a world of unwavering safety and predictability for the boy. They walked on the beach, built sandcastles, flew kites, and read books by the fire. Sophia, the housekeeper, baked cookies with him. For the first time in a year, Leo was allowed to just be a child. The haunted, watchful look in his eyes began to recede, replaced by flickers of curiosity and even moments of unguarded joy. He still didn't speak much, but his silence was different now. It was no longer a cage of fear, but a quiet space of healing. He drew constantly, but his pictures began to change. There were still dark, scribbled monsters, but now there were also drawings of a large, protective figure standing beside a smaller one. Drawings of a house by the sea. Drawings of a kite flying high in the sky. He was drawing his way out of the darkness. On the evening of the gala, Julian dressed in a perfectly tailored tuxedo. He knelt before Leo, who was wearing a small, smart suit. "Tonight we're going to be very brave," Julian said softly. "There will be a lot of people and it might be loud. But I will be with you the entire time. I will not leave your side. Do you understand?" Leo looked at him, his expression serious. He gave a single, firm nod. He reached out and tucked one of his recent drawings into Julian's jacket pocket. It was a picture of the two of them holding hands. Julian's heart swelled. He squeezed the boy's shoulder gently. "Okay, buddy. Let's go finish this." The grand ballroom of the city's most luxurious hotel was a glittering spectacle of wealth and influence. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over hundreds of guests in tuxedos and evening gowns. A string quartet played softly in the corner. It was the pinnacle of Marcus Vance's ambition, a room full of the city's elite, all there to applaud his generosity and his devotion to his late wife's memory. He stood at a podium on a raised stage, a large, flattering photograph of him and Lily projected on a screen behind him. He was basking in the adoration, his smile radiant, his charm at its most potent. He was in the middle of a moving, expertly delivered speech. "Lily was a light," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "A light of compassion, of love, of endless generosity. In her name, we have gathered tonight to ensure that light never fades. We are here for the children. Children like my own beloved son, Leo, who has endured so much loss. I have dedicated my life to him, to honoring Lily's memory by giving him the stable, loving home she always wanted for him." A wave of sympathetic murmurs rippled through the crowd. At that precise moment, the grand ballroom doors at the back of the room swung open. A collective gasp went through the room as all heads turned. There stood Julian Thorne, a figure of quiet, formidable power, holding the small hand of his nephew, Leo. They began to walk down the central aisle, their progress slow, deliberate, and utterly silent. The string quartet faltered and then stopped playing. The only sound was the soft tread of Julian's shoes on the thick carpet. Marcus froze at the podium, his practiced smile faltering. He stared at them, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and fury. He had not expected this. He had not expected Julian to have the audacity to bring the boy here. "Julian," Marcus said into the microphone, his voice regaining a semblance of control, though it was now tight and strained. "This is highly inappropriate. This is a private event. Whatever issues you have, this is neither the time nor the place." He motioned to the hotel security guards who were moving hesitantly toward the aisle. Julian didn't stop until he reached the foot of the stage. He looked up at Marcus, his expression unreadable, his gaze as cold and hard as granite. He held up a hand to the security guards, a simple gesture of command that made them halt in their tracks. He then turned to the sound technician in the corner of the room, a man Evelyn had already briefed and compensated handsomely, and gave a slight nod. A moment later, a new sound filled the ballroom. Not music, but a child's terrified voice, amplified through the state-of-the-art sound system. "I'm sorry. It was an accident." The guests shifted uncomfortably, murmuring in confusion. Marcus's face went white. He knew that voice. He knew that cry. Then, his own voice, cold and venomous, boomed through the speakers, a stunning contrast to the benevolent tone he had used just moments before. "Accidents have consequences. You need to learn. A night in the shed will help you remember to be more careful." A collective gasp swept through the ballroom. People looked at each other, then at Marcus, their expressions of admiration curdling into ones of confusion and horror. "No, please. It's dark. Please, don't scold me anymore. Don't put me in there." Leo's desperate, begging pleas echoed off the crystal chandeliers, a gut-wrenching sound that silenced the entire room. Then came the final, damning sounds. The thud of the shed door, the rattle and click of the padlock. Silence. A profound, ringing silence fell over the ballroom. The smiling photograph of Marcus and Lily on the screen behind the stage now looked like a grotesque mockery. "What is this? What is this doctored nonsense?" Marcus stammered into the microphone, his voice trembling with rage and panic. "This is a lie. An attack on my character by a disturbed and jealous man." Julian gave another nod to the technician. The photograph of Lily and Marcus vanished, replaced by a high-resolution image of Leo's first drawing. The small, caged figure and the giant, screaming monster. Another gasp, this one louder, more horrified. Julian's voice, calm and clear, cut through the tension without the aid of a microphone. This is my nephew's testimony. This is what he has been trying to tell the world while he has been trapped in silence. The images on the screen changed, cycling through all of Leo's drawings. The shed with the padlock. The figure with the belt. The woman with X's for eyes lying on the ground. It was a devastating narrative, a silent film of horror playing out for everyone to see. These are lies, Marcus shrieked, his polished facade completely shattered. He was no longer the charming philanthropist. He was a cornered, rabid animal. He's a troubled boy. He makes things up. Is that so? Julian's voice was dangerously quiet. Then perhaps the guests would like to hear from Mrs. Gable, your next-door neighbor for the past year. From a table near the front, Mrs. Gable stood up, trembling but resolute. Evelyn Reed stood beside her, a steadying hand on her arm. All eyes turned to the elderly woman. I heard you, Mrs. Gable said, her voice shaking but clear, amplified by a discreet microphone Evelyn had provided. I heard you shouting at that poor child. I heard him crying. I saw you leave him outside in the cold. I saw the truth, and I am not afraid of you anymore. The foundation of Marcus's world had crumbled, but Julian had one final, devastating blow to deliver. He reached into his own jacket pocket, not for the drawing Leo had given him, but for a folded piece of paper Elias had uncovered in the deepest corners of his investigation. It was a copy of an email sent from Lily's personal account to her lawyer just 1 week before her death, an email Marcus never knew existed. Julian nodded to the technician one last time. The drawings on the screen were replaced by the text of the email, magnified for all to read. It said, I need to see you urgently. I am afraid of Marcus. He is not the man I thought he was. I believe he is stealing from me, and his temper around Leo terrifies me. I want to begin divorce proceedings immediately, and I want to change my will to make my brother, Julian, Leo's sole guardian in the event of my death. I feel like I am in danger. The room erupted in a storm of shocked and furious whispers. The implication was clear and horrifying. Lily's accident was no accident. Marcus Vance was not just an abuser, he was very likely a murderer. That was the final blow. Marcus stared at the email, his face a mask of disbelief and pure, animalistic terror. His carefully constructed universe had been utterly and publicly obliterated in the space of 5 minutes. He let out a primal scream of rage and denial, sweeping the contents of the podium to the floor. Lies. All lies. But no one was listening to him anymore. They were all looking at him with expressions of disgust and revulsion. At the back of the ballroom, the doors opened again. This time, it was not Julian Thorne, but a team of uniformed police officers, led by a grim-faced detective. They walked down the aisle, their purpose clear and undeniable. The trap had been sprung. The monster was exposed. Justice, swift and absolute, had finally arrived. The aftermath was a cleansing fire. Marcus Vance's fall from grace was as swift as it was brutal. The gala, intended to be his crowning achievement, became the scene of his public execution. He was arrested that night, his pathetic, raging denials drowned out by the clicking of 100 cameras. The story was a media sensation, a shocking tale of hidden evil behind a philanthropic facade. The audio recordings were played on every news channel, Leo's drawings reproduced in every newspaper. The public, which had once admired Marcus, now reviled him with a ferocious passion. Legally, his case was indefensible. Faced with the mountain of evidence, the recordings, the financial records Elias had uncovered, Mrs. Gable's unshakable testimony, and Lily's final, damning email, he was quickly convicted on multiple counts of child abuse, endangerment, and massive fraud. The investigation into Lily's death was officially reopened, with Marcus as the sole suspect. His world wasn't just shattered. It was salted earth, a place from which nothing would ever grow again. He was sentenced to the maximum possible term, disappearing from the world into the cold, gray anonymity of a prison cell, the final locked room from which he would never escape. Julian, granted immediate and permanent custody of Leo, wasted no time in erasing every last trace of Marcus from their lives. He sold the cold, sterile mansion and all its contents, instructing the real estate agent that he never wanted to see the place again. He felt a profound sense of release as he signed the final papers, closing a chapter of darkness and horror. He kept his promise to Leo. He took him home, not to the imposing Thorne family estate in the city, but back to the house of glass and cedar by the sea. It became their sanctuary, their fortress of peace. Julian stripped his life of all non-essential complications. He delegated the day-to-day operations of his global empire to his most trusted executives, reducing his involvement to a few essential calls a week. His new full-time job was Leo. The healing was a slow, quiet process, measured not in days or weeks, but in small, incremental victories. It was the first time Leo laughed, a real uninhibited belly laugh, as a wave chased him up the beach. It was the first time he fell asleep on the sofa, his head in Julian's lap, without the tension of a looming nightmare. It was the day he finally put away the black and red pencils and began to draw with bright, vibrant colors, yellow suns, blue oceans, and green trees. Julian learned the rhythms of being a father. He learned to make pancakes in the shape of dinosaurs. He learned which bedtime story was the most effective at chasing away bad dreams. He learned to be patient, to listen to the silence and understand what it was saying. He found that in protecting Leo, in giving the boy the childhood that had been stolen from him, he was also healing himself. The gnawing guilt over his sister, the haunted emptiness that had shadowed him for years, began to recede, replaced by a profound sense of purpose and a quiet, abiding love for the small boy who was his last remaining piece of her. He was no longer just a billionaire or a businessman. He was Uncle Julian. He was Dad. One evening, months later, they were sitting on the deck as the sun bled across the horizon in strokes of orange and purple. The air was cool and smelled of salt. Leo had been quiet for a long time, watching the waves roll in. He had a new sketchpad on his lap. He had drawn a picture of their house, with two stick figures standing on the deck, one large and one small, holding hands. A bright yellow sun smiled down on them from the corner of the page. He carefully tore the page from the pad and handed it to Julian. Julian took it, his heart clenching with a familiar mix of sorrow and love. "It's beautiful, Leo. Thank you." Leo looked up at him, his gaze clear and direct, the last vestiges of fear finally gone from his wide, intelligent eyes. He pointed at the drawing, at the two figures standing together against the vastness of the ocean. Then, in a clear, steady voice, a voice Julian had waited so long to hear, he spoke. "Uncle Julian," he said, tapping the chest of the larger figure. Then he tapped the chest of the smaller figure. "Leo," he paused, then swept his finger across the whole picture. The house, the sun, the sea, the two of them. A small, real smile touched his lips. "Home." Julian felt tears well in his eyes. He pulled his nephew into a fierce, protective hug, burying his face in the boy's soft hair. The ghosts of the past were finally quiet. The war was over. The battle had been won. Here, in this boy's arms, with the sound of the ocean as their witness, they were finally, truly home. In the end, the story of Julian and Leo serves as a powerful testament to a truth we often choose to forget: that the greatest evils are not always committed by snarling monsters in the shadows, but by smiling charlatans in the spotlight. Evil so often wears a mask of respectability, of charm and charity, using public perception as a shield for private cruelty. It thrives in the silence of those who are too afraid to speak and in the inattention of those who are too busy to listen. How many silent screams go unheard in our own neighborhoods, behind perfectly painted front doors? How many children, like Leo, are using a language of fear and withdrawal that we fail to understand? True strength, the kind that changes the world, is not found in dominance, wealth, or power. It is found in the quiet resolve of a protector, in the unwavering courage of a witness who chooses to speak, and in the profound resilience of a victim who dares to heal. It is the strength to see the truth behind the mask and to have the courage to tear that mask away for all the world to see, no matter the cost. Julian's greatest victory was not in a boardroom, but on a windswept deck, earned not with a billion-dollar deal, but with patience, compassion, and a promise kept to a little boy. We are so grateful that you joined us for this story. The world can often feel dark, but we believe that stories like this remind us of the enduring power of goodness and the importance of protecting the vulnerable among us. Have you ever encountered a situation where things were not as they seemed on the surface? Have you ever witnessed an act of quiet courage that changed someone's life? We would be honored to hear your thoughts and your own stories in the comments below. Thank you for reading, and may you always have the strength to be a light in someone else's darkness.